Hey, Steve Saretsky here. As always, the Canadian real estate market update with a particular focus on Vancouver. If you're getting sort of value or entertainment out of these videos, all I ask is that you hit thumbs up and subscribe. I appreciate the support. Any questions, comments, put those below. As always, well, actually not as always, this is going to be a longer video really dissecting what's happening in the Vancouver real estate market and the Toronto real estate market. This is obviously my opinion. You shouldn't take it as the holy gospel. Certainly encourage you to do your own research, come to your own conclusions. There's no sort of blanket advice that you can just sort of give out to every single person. Everyone has to do their own, make their own decisions. But this is something I'm very, very passionate about, is watching these real estate markets, providing it. I just basically try to come here and provide as much value as possible. Certainly one of the things that people always say is, this guy is, he's just sad because he didn't get into the market or whatever. And it's like, well, first of all, you have to realize that I'm a real estate agent, so I actually make money on commissions. So these last couple of years of real estate have been really beneficial for me, from sky high prices and really explosive sales. Pays me well. I do own a condo. I'm actually in the process of selling that, and I have family which owns real estate here, and they've done quite well. So for me, it's really the financial thing isn't really an issue. It's more so I just like to come here and provide my thoughts. A lot of this is around financial education. Again, people make their own decisions, right? Like I have a mom that's actually in real estate, a really top producer, owns a multi-million-dollar home on the beach. I told her in 2016, I said, sell it. This thing is frothy. It can't last. She got a tremendous cash offer from some Chinese people. That was sort of in the peak heyday when all the foreign money was flooding in. She didn't take it. That home's probably down $1 million today. So again, I can't even encourage my own mom to do something. People will make their own decisions, and so you basically just place your chips and see where they land. At the end of the day, in 10, 20, 30 years, you see where you're at, and you're basically a result of the decisions that you made. So, first off, talking about the Vancouver detached market, going to get into it here. This is something I've been talking about. This is something that's been happening all throughout 2018, that the Vancouver detached housing market, again for July, came in with a 27-year low in home sales for detached. So, very, very few sales. Sellers are basically sitting there trying to hold out. This is the same time inventory's piling up. It's the highest it's been since 2012, and that's been weighing on prices. So there are tremendous deals out there. If you can find a seller that's willing to move on a product that has to sell, submitting low balls, getting great deals out there. The average sales price for detached in Vancouver declined 16% year over year. The median showed 3%, and the benchmark showed about 5%. So it's pretty much somewhere in between there. I would say it's at least 10% year over year. Peak to trough as of right now, it's probably off about 15 to 20% in Vancouver. More affordable entry level detached, not so much as much, but basically a rule of thumb, I'd say about 15%. And again, this is something that I've been talking about, and this is something we'll discuss more as we get into Toronto, about really that no market just goes directly down. The detached really had a nice head fake in the spring of 2017 as prices basically retested 2016 highs. And this is what I said was it's just a head fake. Sales are still extremely weak. Things are tightening, etc. And so now it's all coming to fruition here in 2018. And I also mentioned that condos finally have turned a corner. They're much more resilient than I thought they would be. But condo sales for July rolled in at a 6-year low, the lowest they've been since July of 2012. Inventory increased by 40% year over year, and sales, I believe, dropped off about 30% year over year. So you have sales again going in one direction, you have inventory going the other, you have a slew of new supply coming on. The average sales price declined year over year by 2%. But with that being said, the median sales price still showed a 5% increase year over year, and the average price per square foot, which I feel is the most accurate metric for the condo market, showed a 5% increase on a year over year basis. So a couple things with that. We've been very used to 25% increases roughly year over year. So you can see that now we're only showing a 5% increase year over year. There's been a very quick and rapid deceleration of condo prices. And if you look over really the last 4 or 5 months when condos arguably topped out, I would say the typical condo today is off about 5% from those peaks. So again, that's not to say like the end of the world. If you have a 1-bedroom condo, it's still going to sell in a week or 2 weeks. It's not going to go into multiple offers, but it's going to get close to your asking price. 2 bedrooms might take you a month, but again, things are still moving, so it's certainly not the end of the world in that space. But it was really only a matter of time until the condo market rolled over and followed the detached housing market. Like, all the value is in the land, so why were people bidding up condos and the detached land prices were actually falling? So this is more sort of an irrational speculative behavior where as long as prices were going up, people were willing to pay the ever higher prices, and inventory is very low, so that still created those bidding wars. But again, that is all starting to shift, and it has shifted quite significantly over the last 4 to 5 months. Looking into the Toronto real estate market now, getting some commentary on this. I said this from the start, and I will reiterate it. Well, first off, I am not the Toronto expert. I don't sell homes in Toronto. But this is merely my opinion. I study a lot of housing data. I have access to a tremendous amount of housing data, and so this is sort of my opinion. You can agree with it or disagree with it, but here we go. So I said from the start that Toronto real estate was lagging Vancouver real estate market on the way up and on the way down. On the way up, Toronto real estate market really started to explode, accelerate higher in prices once Vancouver implemented a foreign buyers tax. The narrative was basically that all the Chinese foreign money was going to flood into Toronto and prices were going to shoot up. Whether, how much of that Chinese money actually moved there and how much of it was just a psychological narrative that pushed those prices up it might never be answered. But prices took off, and then they implemented their foreign buyers tax, and then they had their flash crash in Toronto, and now they're doing they're calling it a recovery, they're calling it stabilization, that prices look maybe even set to increase, and I really don't think that could be further from the truth. So I'm going to grab my notes, and I'm going to read off a few similarities. First of all, what is the Toronto Real Estate Board reporting? So first of all, they're reporting across Toronto Real Estate Board, Greater Toronto Area, that the house price benchmark index it rose by 0.59% year over year. It was down 0.5%. Anyways, it was basically irrelevant, didn't move. But sales were up 18.6% on a year over year basis. So sales are saying year over year in July increased 18.6%. The average sales price increased by 4.8%. So if you're looking at that, you're like, oh my God, sales are increasing, average sales price is increasing. This market is clearly heading for another leg up. And it certainly could be in the data. But to me, this is what you would call sort of a bull trap or a head fake, pretty dead cat bounce, whatever you want to call it. Because the exact same thing happened in Vancouver. Vancouver prices peaked in February of 2016, arguably, and then at the introduction of the foreign buyers tax in August 2016, Vancouver had sort of a flash crash, and instantly sales came to a halt. Prices were declining, particularly average sales prices. Everybody thought the market was tanking, and then it basically rebounded sort of in 2017. Condos shot higher, detached prices retested previous highs. Sales increased year over year. So basically what happened, I'm going to use for sort of an apples to apples similarity, I'll use the Greater Vancouver stats as a whole and compare them to Greater Toronto stats as a whole. So if you look peak to trough in Greater Vancouver, the average sales price across all property types from February 2016 down to August 2016. So from peak to trough, the average sales price in Greater Vancouver declined by 24%. So if you looked at that, you would have said, oh my gosh, the average sales price declined by 24% in less than a year in Greater Vancouver. This market is clearly crashing. Run for the hills. But if you really know real estate cycles, booms and busts, that's really not how real estate markets function. It's generally very slow, it's sticky on the way down. You look at the United States, for example, very obvious example, prices actually peaked in 2005, they bottomed in 2012. So you can imagine there's probably quite a few head fakes in that time period. So we had the average sales price crash in Vancouver by 24%. And then basically from there they just increased. So if you took August 2016 average sales price and compared it to August of 2017 average sales price, it actually increased by 16%. So prices crashed 24% and then they increased 16%. And during that same period, sales increased by 22%. So from August 2016 to August 2017, sales actually increased by 22% in Greater Vancouver. Same thing in September. And in October in 2017, the sales were actually up 34% year over year. And the prices were up in October as well. Same thing in November, December, and then finally in January was in December when the data again started rolling back over, where Vancouver started reporting negative price growth and negative sales year over year, again to a point now here in July where across all property types, Vancouver home sales declined to the lowest total since July of 2001. So again, like a 17-year low in home sales across all property types. So it's not just the detached, it's the condos as well. So I look at that as the Toronto Real Estate Board, like they went through this sort of flash crash. Condos, despite the flash crash, condo prices still have been increasing just like they did in Vancouver. And now they're reporting that sales are starting to increase and the average price is starting to increase, just like what happened in Vancouver from August 2017 through to January 2018, and then finally back down. And anyone that's in the Vancouver real estate market knows exactly what's happening. Clearly a market that has been rolling over. But again, you can agree with that, disagree with it. Maybe Toronto truly is different. Maybe this is the leg higher. I don't know. But I certainly look at it, again, this is why I've always encouraged sort of that bigger picture thought process, is to sort of understand where we are, not only as a real estate market, more so as an economy. The Canadian real estate market, the Canadian economy, it never deleveraged in 2008. So you have to ask yourself, well, why? Everywhere else, a lot of these areas, Canada, Australia, these markets, they never crashed. They actually took a small dip and they went right back up. But why? It was an introduction of various government policies, stimulus, backdoor bailouts through CIBC, etc. Interestingly enough, CIBC's Benjamin Tal most recently came out, it was about a year ago, and quote for quote, what did he say? So he said, it was almost illegal in Canada to not have borrowed a mortgage in 2008 during the financial crisis. That's what he said about Canada. Because basically the banks were handing out, they're incentivized, they're basically told to keep lending because they didn't want to experience a nasty financial crisis like the rest of the world. So they basically loosened lending standards and allowed people to borrow more and more money. And so that's what Benjamin Tal said, and he says, we basically borrowed, quote for quote, we borrowed our way out of the financial crisis. But to me, that's not like, you're basically papering over the problems. You didn't get rid of the problem, you just borrowed your way away from the problem. So at some point, it just doesn't work forever. You can't just borrow your way out. So what's happened is Canadian households have taken on the most in debt since the financial crisis, other than China, and they've actually borrowed more than Australia. So the amount of debt that households have taken on, but you can't just keep borrowing. Households can't just keep borrowing to infinity. At some point, it just simply doesn't work, and that policy basically becomes like pushing on a string. This is what I've talked about before, and these households have to deleverage at some point, and you're starting to see that deleveraging now show up in a lot of the data, and so that's really been the thesis. It's like, well, sales are extremely weak. Interest rates are going up. You're at the end of an economic expansion, and there's a lot of evidence that shows Canadian households are in the process of deleveraging. Mortgage credit growth is at its slowest pace of growth since 2001. The slowest pace since 2001. So you have households really in the process of deleveraging. Again, higher, like, real estate booms tend to happen at the start of an economic expansion. They basically mirror the business cycle, and they actually roll over before the business cycle. So again, we're at this very long, I think it's the second longest economic expansion in history, where you have all the signs of that cycle coming to an end. And I think that you have that buildup of 2008 that was never dealt with, and so that's sort of my thesis behind the housing markets. Now, again, could be wrong. This is my thesis. You put your money, you put your chips where they are, and you see what happens, right? But I look at it, I mean, again, maybe you have sort of the bullish thesis, you could say, is central banks and governments may go to more extreme lengths to support financial assets. So, I mean, since 2008, central banks have purchased $20 trillion in assets. $20 trillion in assets they've purchased, with really obscene policies, monetary policy. European Central Bank, negative interest rates. People are buying up negative yielding junk bonds. Bank of Japan basically owns the entire bond market. There's no free bond market in Japan. They basically own, in order to suppress interest rates, in order to keep borrowing costs down, the Bank of Japan has basically printed money and purchased government debt. Bank of Switzerland, central bank in Switzerland, they own $88 billion in US equities. So what they've basically done is they've printed money. It's like me firing up a printing machine in my room here and going out and using that money that I just printed and buying Apple stock. The Swiss National Bank owns roughly $3 billion of Apple stock. This is all in order to support asset prices. So we really truly do live in this insane policy. So maybe that's sort of the bullish case, where maybe they just simply can't and won't let financial assets decline or fall to a level that it should fall. That's certainly your bullish case, but again, this is just opinion. I don't necessarily know how this all shapes up, how it plays out, but you have these obscene policies, and one of the things that I've noticed, not only in real estate but in every market, everyone's there to really pump their own book. Everybody has, the real estate is the game in town. Think about all the money so when the real estate board comes out, or when the brokerage comes out, in Toronto it's 50, they're representing 50,000 agents, and in Greater Vancouver they're representing 20,000 agents. What is a bank economist or a bank going to come out and say about the housing market, or about the quality of lending that they're doing, when they're in the process of literally selling off hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of mortgages to European pension funds? Like, what are they going to come out and say? Oh, hey, we think housing market's going to decline by 20%? No, everybody's pumping their own book. It's the same thing as central banks saying that we're seeing this tremendous economic growth, the economy is healthy, we're churning out this and that. But it's like, well, no, you guys have literally just purchased up $20 trillion in assets. You literally own a whole bunch of the bond market, and you're literally buying stocks to support the stock market. So everyone has their own interests, and that's why I'm a huge proponent of really financial education. So it's the least you can sort of know what's going on and at least make an educated decision. And it could end up being the right or wrong decision. Nobody knows, right? So, anyways, that's all I got today. I'm not going to ramble on. I think that Vancouver clearly is in the process now of rolling over into a substantial buyer's market. Clearly, that's what's happening in the detached space. We're now starting to see that in the condo space. I think Toronto is a full year behind Vancouver in their real estate cycle, so I think that these numbers will probably continue to be positive for the next could be 3, 4, 5 months. But I do think that they follow Vancouver and roll over because at the end of the day, you have credit growth is anemic. You have higher interest rates en route. People simply can't borrow to that capacity, and you have a lot of the foreign money that's pulled out, which has sort of left you with this debt overhang. At the same time, you're churning out a record number of new housing units, which is very typical of a late real estate cycle. That's my thoughts, my thesis. Could be wrong. Welcome your comments below. Otherwise, see you next week.